I want to bring in NBC's Julie Sirkin, who's at CPAC in Maryland. NBC's Melanie Zanona is on Capitol Hill. Tim Miller is the host of the Bulwark podcast. He helped lead Jeb Bush's 2016 presidential campaign, and he's an MSNBC political analyst. And Eddie Glaude is a Princeton University professor and an MSNBC analyst as well. Mel, let's start with you, because we've seen this disconnect between the way GOP lawmakers are trying to assuage concerned constituents and then the way they talk on conservative media about DOJ and Trump's cuts. So how much longer can they continue to play both sides like this?
Yeah, the rubber is really meeting the road for a lot of these Republicans. Up until this point, I would say most Republicans on Capitol Hill have been publicly very supportive of the DOJ mission, right? And that was really easy to do when it was things like USAID or foreign aid that was on the chopping block. But now some of those cuts are starting to hit close to home for some of these lawmakers. There's a lot of federal workers in a lot of different parts of the country. There's a lot of concerns behind the scenes about slashes to things like officials working on the bird flu, for example, and how that might impact egg prices. And so behind the scenes, there's a lot of Republicans who have been back-channeling with the administration, raising alarm bells. I think they're really torn right now, especially when it comes to what they're going to say publicly, because they don't want to be seen as disloyal to Trump or crossing Trump and the DOJ mission, but they want to stand up and protect their constituents. And in a lot of cases, this is going to have to be a choice that ultimately they are going to have to make. And you're starting to see those angry town halls playing out in very ruby red districts across the country. This is something that could continue on as these cuts start to really impact different places. And I just don't think Republicans have quite figured out how to handle it yet.
Yeah, it's a rock and a hard place, but ultimately you're elected by your constituents to represent them. It's going to be a hard sell if they start saying they'd prefer to stay on the president's side versus the people who sent them to Washington. But Tim, I want to play a part of an exchange between our own Peter Alexander and the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. It's from this morning, and Peter asked her about town halls like the one we've been talking about. Watch.
We're now hearing from constituents in some traditionally red districts right now complaining about what they say is the chainsaw approach and saying that it's been done very sloppily, the cuts to jobs and spending. How do you respond to that criticism?
I love how the media takes a few critics when the overwhelming response from the American people is support for what this administration is doing. If you look at the public polling, 70% of Americans, according to CBS, believe that President Trump is delivering on the promises he made.
However dismissive this White House wants to be about its critics, people are feeling this. Lawmakers are hearing about it in lots of forums, not just in-person town halls. And for some of whom the layoffs are recent, what happens, Tim, after that last paycheck hits? How long do you think political ideology or the desire for a more efficient government is going to sustain people when they can't afford their groceries?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ellie. And it was a good question for Peter, though. I was hoping that you were going to play a different good question that he asked her about if they've caught a lot of fraud in DOJ, where are the indictments? Because fraud is illegal, and she didn't have a good answer to that one either. But to your question, look. We are seeing some evidence of this, and it's going to take time to show up at scale. But we wrote about this in the Bulwark today. There was a 32-year Navy captain who got fired. He was the chief of staff for one of the regional FEMA operations. These kind of stories aren't going to wear well with people. Like with the richest guy in the world, a South African immigrant, arbitrarily and capriciously firing veterans who are serving the public to protect us when there are natural disasters. Once you start to actually put faces on the people that are doing a lot of these jobs, it's going to be much harder to defend than kind of the first shock and awe, so to speak, where you can just generically attack bureaucrats, right? Generically attacking bureaucrats is easy and popular. Attacking veterans who lost their job, not so much.
Yeah, exactly. The idea of a faceless government bureaucracy versus your friends and neighbors who are trying to provide for their families while also serving this country. It's a really important point there, Tim. Eddie, as we heard from these people in Georgia and Oregon, it's not the idea of saving money or a desire for efficiency that's actually got them upset. It's the way that this is being handled. So is there a message that the White House can take from that it's the blunt instrument approach that people are in large part being upset by?
Well, one would hope if they were actually concerned about what actual everyday ordinary people are thinking. Right now, they're like a bull in a china shop. The constituencies, or their base, is asking for a more directed, a more precision-based kind of approach. But what we do know is this, and Tim and others have made the point, they're not concerned about the human costs. They're only concerned about these abstract questions of efficiency, of deconstructing the administrative state. What does it mean that all of these people suddenly have to think about how they're going to pay their mortgage, how they're going to put food on the table for their kids, how they're going to pay for college, right? And it's not like a localized layoff. This is the federal government. So it's going to impact across people across the country. And the thing is that what we're clear about, Allie, is that they don't really care. They're just going to pursue their agenda. But hopefully the constituent base will make the representatives who they elect care, because the folks, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, don't seem to.
Yeah, this is truly a moment where the grassroots, I think, could have an impact. Meanwhile, as this is happening, Julie, you've got Elon Musk, the face of all of these cuts, going to CPAC and literally wielding a chainsaw inscribed with the phrase, "Long live liberty, damn it." The ad sort of writes itself for Democrats on this one. You see the image there on the screen. But what was the reaction in the room? Because you're with a group of people who are the conservative grassroots.
Yeah, but in here, Allie, as you know, this year's CPAC is really a victory lap for Trump and his allies. So the crowd here ate that moment up. It was probably the most energetic that we saw them all day long. And I'll tell you, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senator Eric Schmitt, Senator Rick Scott, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, all praised Musk efforts, all praised the Doge efforts as well. This is what Musk, though, had to say when he was on stage and what he's discovered in his first few weeks as apparently the head of this department. Watch.
People ask me, what's the most surprising thing that you've encountered when you go to D.C., when you're in D.C.? And I said, well, the most surprising thing is the scale of the expenditures and actually how easy it is to, when you add caring and competence where it was absent before, you can actually save billions of dollars, sometimes in an hour. Yeah. Like, it's wild.
I'm not quite sure that has happened yet. Certainly there are Doge committees on the Hill in the House and Senate. This is an area that really Congress is supposed to be in charge of, that they're frankly uniquely bad at over the last few years, especially adding to the deficit. Even now in the budget resolution that the Senate passed last night, more funding for immigration, for military, for energy. And meanwhile, as Musk is trying to cut a lot from the budget. Now, it was an interesting moment earlier when House Speaker Mike Johnson, as Melanie knows well, said that they would not be touching Medicaid. They won't be cutting that program. They won't be cutting SNAP benefits as well. Musk said they will be cutting those programs. And it's just that kind of tightrope that Republicans are having to walk while they don't want to necessarily push away the Trump administration in these early days of his second term. But at the same time, they're hearing from constituents back home in those town halls and those red districts that Mel was talking about. And so I think it's going to come to a head very, very soon here in D.C. when they come back next week.
Yeah, Mel, Julie teased you up nicely because it wasn't the only moment of dissonance that the speaker endured between him and Musk, even at CPAC alone, because Musk and the president have also floated the idea of Doge dividends. Speaker Johnson came in, though, with a fiscal reality check of sorts. Watch.
Politically, that would be great for us, because then everybody a check. But really, we have to think of it, I think, in a...
That just got everybody's attention, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
I just saw everybody look up all of a sudden.
I know.
Yep.
But if you think about our core principles, right, fiscal responsibility is what we do as conservatives. That's our brand. And we have a $36 trillion federal debt. We have a giant deficit that we're contending with. I think we need to pay down the credit card, right? That's what I think we need to do.
Speaker Johnson there, Mel, basically saying, hey, guys, remember, we're conservatives. Do you think he's going to get his way on this, though?
Well, Allie, as you know, and as Julie knows very well, having covered Capitol Hill, Trump does tend to get his way around here. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately that is what happens. But let me explain to you why this is such a big problem for Johnson. Because in the House, they are trying to pass this budget plan, and they are trying to enact some very steep spending cuts and trying to get fiscal conservatives to come along. And there was some hope that some of the Doge savings could be scored, and that could maybe not formally add to the level of cuts that they're going to write in their bill, but it could at least assuage some of these skeptical fiscal hawks, some of these hardline conservatives, into backing a package that might be a little bit more expensive than they otherwise would have. So without those Doge savings, if those go out the door in the form of checks, that could complicate Mike Johnson's life here on Capitol Hill. But this is just another great example of how the cracks in the GOP's support of Doge are really starting to form.
Tim, I want to just stay on the idea of Doge dividends for a few more seconds if we can, because we don't have any idea if these checks would even work, how much they would even be for. Doge is completely untransparent in the work that it's actually doing. But is there any political risk to floating these kinds of checks if they aren't a sure thing?
Well, I mean, there's some political risk to Mike Johnson. You just look at those two videos there of Elon Musk with the sunglasses and the chainsaw and everybody screaming. And then you have poor schoolmarm Mike Johnson being like, remember, guys, remember our principles. We've got to pay down the debt. You can see why one is more appealing than the other politically. But the reality is that they are in a bind with regards to the budget, even without paying Doge dividends. I mean, the budget they put out with extending the Trump tax cuts and no tax on tips, even with the Doge cuts, still adds another $3.5 trillion to the debt. And Trump added more to the debt in his first term than any other president in our history. And so, Mike Johnson, I think, is going to have a tough sell talking about fiscal responsibility, given the obligations that they have and the promises Trump has made with the tax cuts, in addition to this now floated dividend.